Large-scale annual military exercises in Taiwan. This time, the imagined scenario is a Chinese invasion later in the year. In an unusually harsh tone, Japan expresses serious concerns over Beijing's human rights record and territorial disputes. South Korea seeks cooperation with a Quad alliance. That's the US, Australia, Japan, and India. At the same time, the German chancellor wishes for more cooperation with Beijing. The real death toll from the pandemic in Wuhan remains a mystery. Videos of packed cemeteries may tell a story different from the official version. And President Biden hasn't spoken with Xi Jinping about virus origins. His Secretary of State says the U.S. will continue to investigate where the virus really came from. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Taiwan is set to conduct new military exercises in light of Beijing's aggression. This time, the imagined scenario is a Chinese invasion later in the year. NTD's Don Ma has more.
Taiwan's defense ministry is releasing the details of this year's annual military exercises. It will be slightly different this time around. The military exercises will be conducted with the presumption that Beijing will invade Taiwan this year. The concern stems from an escalation in Chinese military aggression. This year, the Chinese regime made its largest military incursion into Taiwan's air zone. Taiwan is also concerned about Beijing's rapid military development. Last month, a U.S. Pentagon war simulation predicted that the U.S. will lose fast in a war against China. That is, if the U.S. intervened in a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. The U.S. doesn't have official diplomatic ties with Taiwan, but U.S. law requires that Washington supplies the island with means of self-defense. The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, claims Taiwan as part of its own territory and has vowed to annex it by force. While Taiwan has never formally declared independence, it does have its own democratically elected government, military, and constitution. On Wednesday, Taiwan's defense ministry announced that the military exercises will be conducted in April and in July. The exercises will compose of beachfront combat and cityfront combat. Some 8,000 soldiers will participate. That's an 8-fold increase from last year. Other exercises will likely involve operating fighter jets and firing missiles. The Taiwanese side is not releasing the precise location of the exercises. Also on Wednesday, Taiwan's foreign minister told reporters that we will fight the war if we need to fight the war. We will defend ourselves to the very last day. Don Ma, NTD News.
In a rare move, Japan is publicly criticizing the Chinese regime's human rights record. This after the U.S. Secretary of State's recent visit to Japan. The Japanese foreign minister had a heated phone call with his Chinese counterpart on Monday. He expressed serious concerns regarding Beijing's intrusions into Japan's maritime territories. The foreign minister also criticized Communist China for worsening human rights conditions in Hong Kong and Xinjiang. It's rare for Japan to criticize Beijing publicly, especially over human rights. For decades, Japan has cautiously maintained its relationship with its next-door neighbor and biggest trading partner. Japan is also asking Beijing to remove import restrictions on Japanese food products. Chinese authorities are reportedly censoring Japanese animes starting this month. On the other hand, Japan and the U.S. seem to be coming closer. To bolster U.S.-Japan relations, the Japanese Prime Minister will visit Washington next Friday. Amid tensions in the South China Sea, the Philippines is now dampening its former strong tone towards Beijing. Previously, the Philippines said it would stand its ground behind every inch of its territory. Now it says it wants to resolve the territorial dispute peacefully. Tensions between the two countries are on the rise. It has to do with Chinese vessels continuously showing up in the Philippines' territorial waters. The Philippines has repeatedly called on the Chinese side to remove its ships, but to no avail. A Tuesday statement from the Filipino president reads that the country wishes to resolve the matter through diplomatic and peaceful means. He hopes this will not be what he calls an obstacle to the overall positive trajectory of our bilateral friendly relations. The statement comes on the same day the Chinese Foreign Ministry urged the Philippines to preserve peace in the area. The softer tone may suggest the Filipino president doesn't want to jeopardize his country's cooperation with China. In February, the Chinese regime gave the Philippines 600,000 vaccine doses. The South Korean Foreign Ministry says the country is willing to cooperate with the Quad alliance. The collaboration is believed to be a counterbalance to the Chinese regime's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific region. South Korea says the cooperation will be on an issue-by-issue basis. They want to tackle issues including transnational crimes and cyber and maritime security. The Quad alliance consists of the U.S., Australia, Japan, and India. It first formed back in 2007. It re-entered the spotlight during the Trump administration. Then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo bolstered the alliance. Its purpose is to counter an increasingly assertive Chinese regime in the Indo-Pacific. The Biden administration also vowed to work closer with allies and preserve the Quad alliance. Although South Korea hasn't received a formal invitation into the Quad, it shows determination to cooperate. South Korean officials said even if it might not be the Quad, we can seek cooperation issue by issue with the Quad member countries in areas where we can contribute. CCP head Xi Jinping called German Chancellor Angela Merkel on Wednesday and asked for more cooperation. Merkel echoed Xi's suggestions and said Germany is willing to work with Communist China. Xi told Merkel during the phone call that relations between Beijing and the European Union were facing what he called various challenges. He hoped the EU would deal with Beijing independently. He also claimed more cooperation between the two sides would bring more certainty to the world. Xi went on to ask Germany not to impose restrictions on Chinese firms and cited that China is Germany's biggest trading partner. Xi hoped the EU would remain open and expand cooperation with companies in China. Merkel echoed Xi's call. She said Germany and the EU need to cooperate more with Beijing amid world challenges. She added Germany is willing to work together in areas such as pandemic prevention and climate issues. Merkel also said Germany is open for talks about the fair distribution of vaccines and mutual vaccine certifications between the two countries. The phone call came amid a frosty relationship between the EU and Beijing. Last month, the EU imposed sanctions against Chinese officials for the first time since 1989. They were in response to human rights abuses against Uyghur Muslims in China's Xinjiang region. Beijing denied the accusation and blacklisted some EU lawmakers, experts, and entities. The sanctions endangered an EU-China investment pact. The US, the UK, and Canada also sanctioned Chinese officials over Xinjiang. For decades, the communist regime has imposed restrictions on all foreign companies in China. To enter the Chinese market, European companies have to build a joint venture with a Chinese company and allow technology transfers to their Chinese partners. Because the Chinese regime is largely believed to have underreported virus deaths, the real death toll of the CCP virus in Wuhan remains a mystery. Official data from the regime says nearly 3,900 people died of the virus in China as of last April. But recent events in Wuhan suggest the real number might be far more than that. Last Sunday was a traditional Chinese holiday commemorating the dead. Online videos and pictures show that cemeteries in Wuhan are packed with people. Locals say this is very unusual. Along with the pictures, a tweet says today, Wuhan people began to sweep the tombs. One of the cemeteries is densely packed with new graves, and people in mourning are everywhere. Wuhan resident Mr. Qi told the Chinese language edition of the Epoch Times Wuhan cemeteries opened 10 days earlier for tomb sweeping this year, but there were still traffic jams all the time. He had never seen such a thing before. Chinese media says there are 320,000 people visiting cemeteries in Wuhan this year, around Memorial Day. Data from the regime's Department of Civil Affairs may also shed some light on the issue. Official data shows during the first quarter of 2020, over 150,000 people disappeared from the province's pension benefits list. But before that, the number had been growing for over 20 years in a row. Officials refused to explain the decline. At the same time, they reportedly prohibit both media and citizen journalists to collect data on funerals. A Chinese whistleblower and his family members are spending years in jail for exposing corruption. Following years of physical abuse in prison, the man is now in critical condition. NTD's Becky Zhou has the details.
Chinese whistleblower Guo Hongwei is believed to be in intensive care following years of physical abuse in jail. He was jailed for reporting a case of local corruption. An official claimed false expenses. The Chinese regime sentenced him twice with a combined sentence of 18 years. Guo's father told NTD that Guo's life is now at risk.
After the surgery, the doctor said Guo is in a very dangerous situation. He's on a life support system and he is going to die soon.
Guo's father says the predicament started 2 decades ago when Guo worked at a power plant in northeastern China's Jilin province. According to Radio Free Asia, Guo told local authorities that a CCP official claimed thousands of dollars of false medical expenses. The official worked at the Justice Department and soon retaliated against Guo. Guo was first sentenced to 5 years in 2003 for what authorities called blackmailing.
Guo didn't plead guilty and refused to obey the rules in jail. We went to file complaints and then the jail warden tortured him more brutally.
Guo's father says Guo used to be very healthy, but now he is in critical condition. Guo's mother and sister believed Guo had been wronged and tried to see justice served. After finishing his first jail sentence, Guo and his mother went to Beijing to file a complaint to central authorities. The regime arrested both of them in 2015. The following year, Guo was sentenced to another 13 years and his 79-year-old mother to 6 years in prison. Guo's sister was also arrested after speaking out for Guo. In 2018, she was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison for what authorities called causing trouble and obstructing official duties. Guo's father says he is still proud of Guo's integrity. This is because his son stood up against corruption and didn't bow down to the authorities. Reporting by Becky Zhou, NTD News.
Coming up, U.S. President Joe Biden is saying he hasn't spoken with CCP leader Xi Jinping about the origins of the virus. And his Secretary of State says the U.S. will continue to investigate where the virus really came from. More on that after the break. A reporter asks President Joe Biden if he's spoken with the Chinese regime's leader about the origins of the CCP virus. Biden says they haven't talked about it.
The reporter's question freezes Biden as he's leaving a press briefing.
Mr. President, you mentioned 554,064 American dead from COVID-19. A lot of families want to know how this happened, how it got here.
He notes that Biden has a long relationship with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. The reporter asks Biden if he spoke with Xi about reports that China misled the world at the start of the pandemic.
No, I have not had a conversation with Xi.
Biden says he hasn't. Many people note that China lied and misled the world about the virus. Biden drew scrutiny for not bringing it up. Former President Trump maintains that China was instrumental in spreading the virus around the world. He says they could have prevented it and told the UN that the world must hold China accountable. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was elusive when asked about holding China accountable. He says they're focused on preventing another pandemic. The World Health Organization released a controversial report about how the virus started. Critics say it's tainted by China's influence. Representative James Comer calls the WHO's report a product of China's propaganda machine. The U.S. is one of 14 nations questioning the report. They're calling for a transparent and independent investigation.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the U.S. will continue to investigate where the CCP virus really came from.
And we'll keep pushing for a complete and transparent investigation into the origins of this epidemic to learn what happened so it doesn't happen again. We've got to make sure that we can better detect, prevent, prepare for, and respond to future pandemics and other biological threats. Otherwise, we'll be badly letting ourselves and future generations down.
The virus was first detected in Wuhan in late 2019. But since then, the Chinese regime has repeatedly denied global investigation teams entry into China. A WHO group was finally allowed into China earlier this year. They published a report last week. Their report dismissed the possibility that the virus came from a Wuhan lab. They said it is extremely unlikely. Last week, a dozen nations, including the U.S., Australia, and Japan, jointly questioned the WHO report. These nations says it lacks crucial data. The WHO report came days after former U.S. CDC Director Robert Redfield said he believes in the lab leak theory. He told CNN he believes the virus escaped from a Wuhan lab in September 2019.
I still think the most likely etiology of this pathogen in Wuhan was from a laboratory, escaped.
A WHO advisor and former Biden staffer told CBS News recently that Chinese authorities have the power to decide which experts are allowed into the country.
China would do the primary investigation and then just share its findings with these international experts. So these international experts weren't allowed to do their own primary investigation.
He likened the investigation in China to the Soviet Union's probe of the Chernobyl nuclear accident. Soviet officials were blamed for covering up the 1986 disaster and for hiding it from the rest of the world. The Wuhan Institute of Virology is home to one of the largest collections of coronaviruses in the world. It is the only biosafety level 4 lab in China. That's the highest security status. The U.S. State Department says the lab has conducted secret projects with the Chinese regime's military. The U.S. State Department is planning to share CCP virus vaccines with other countries. Part of the plan uses billions of dollars approved by Congress. The comment seems to be hinting at Russia and Communist China. The Chinese regime is stepping up its export of vaccines to other countries. This before making the shots more available at home. Despite its promises, Chinese vaccine shipments often arrive late, in smaller quantities than promised, with lower efficacy rates than promised, and sometimes even come with conditions, such as the receiving countries can no longer criticize the regime's human rights record. Data shows that the U.S. is ahead in terms of donations to organizations supporting vaccine access, while Beijing is not among the top donors. Professors at Cornell University rejected the school's proposal for a Beijing-funded program. We look at some of the reasons behind this.
The Cornell Faculty Senate last Wednesday rejected a resolution endorsing a partnership proposal with Peking University. Student leaders at Cornell also unanimously voted to demand that the partnership stop. Both groups voiced concern for human rights abuses in China, especially genocide in Xinjiang, as well as the risks to academic freedom.
Could you imagine such a regime in which academic freedom also existed? And that problem is so serious that we tend to combine the two.
The partnership proposed involved a joint degree program paid for by the Chinese Ministry of Education. The Washington Free Beacon reports that in the 5 years to 2019, Cornell raised at least $27 million from China. According to the outlet, the new partnership with Peking University could bring in up to an additional $1 million annually. However, some professors worry that their institution values lucrative relationships more than their moral principles.
In effect, many faculty felt that the Chinese government was purchasing the legitimacy that a connection to Cornell would offer.
In recent years, the U.S. has become increasingly concerned about influences from the Chinese regime coming into American campuses, with the government and other institutions considering especially how to maintain academic freedom.
We just have to cut ties with China. That means, for instance, no Confucius Institutes. That means no joint programs with China. And that means no Chinese campuses of American universities in China.
Bensel and another faculty member introduced new resolutions that will strengthen the role of the Faculty Senate in deciding future partnerships with all authoritarian countries. The voting for those resolutions is set to conclude Wednesday. They say they are optimistic.
The Chinese Communist regime dealt yet another blow to electric car maker Tesla. But experts believe Chinese authorities won't drive it out of the Chinese market completely. NTD's Chen Han has the story.
The Chinese regime has reportedly banned some Chinese authorities from driving Tesla cars. These people include military personnel, certain regime agency employees, and workers at key state-owned enterprises. They reportedly banned Tesla because the cars are equipped with devices capable of obtaining various data. Beijing believes there is a risk of state secrets getting leaked. Following the ban, Tesla's founder Elon Musk publicly clarified in late March that he wouldn't share any sensitive information with the US government. He added that if he does, the negative impacts will cause the company to go bankrupt. A professor at the University of South Carolina Icahn Business School believes Musk has no incentives to use Tesla's cars for espionage. But his promise isn't enough to dispel the CCP's suspicions.
He does have the ability to collect data and then transmit through satellites, and it can be received at Tesla's headquarters. The CCP is a master in this area, a master of surveillance, and it uses this kind of big data. If Musk has this ability, even if he doesn't use it and doesn't want to use it, the CCP will still worry about it.
US-based China affairs analyst Chen Peng says Tesla has dominated the Chinese market very quickly. That has put tremendous pressure on Chinese electric car makers that the CCP is trying to support.
For example, Musk reduces the price to a price close to that of Chinese domestic cars. He's getting more and more market share in China. The CCP is very, very unhappy with it. So the CCP is seizing the opportunity of the clash between the US and China and making trouble for Tesla.
But Chen also says the CCP won't drive Tesla out of China because it still wants Tesla's advanced technology.
The CCP may still be thinking about some of Tesla's technologies, such as SpaceX, that involves some more advanced technologies in the world. Therefore, the CCP will not completely ban Tesla, but will give it a certain amount of the market and will take different opportunities to tame Tesla.
Chen says the CCP believes that electric cars can be an opportunity to change the fate of its, quote, made in China plan, so it has a strong desire to control Tesla's Chinese branch. This is the second time Chinese authorities targeted Tesla this year. In February, Chinese state media ramped up reports of customer complaints against Tesla. 5 Chinese regulators then summoned the company's Chinese branch. Chen Han, NTD News.
The French branch of a CCP mouthpiece could be in trouble. A Spain-based human rights group is filing multiple complaints against the French-language edition of the Chinese regime-run broadcaster CGTN. Human rights group Safeguard Defenders' complaints are in light of CGTN's alleged abuse of a Uyghur child. CGTN's French-language channel is believed to have forced a 10-year-old Uyghur girl to antagonize her own father. The father is living in Australia now and hasn't been able to see his wife and children in the past 6 years. The rest of his family are all in China's Xinjiang region. Safeguard Defenders believe the 10-year-old girl was under severe pressure and coercion during the interview. CGTN reportedly accused the father of abandoning his family. But Safeguard Defenders says this is not true. The father had repeatedly said it is the Chinese regime that doesn't allow his family to leave the country, and he is afraid to go to Xinjiang because he might be detained. The rights group filed its complaints to a French TV regulator and the U.S. Federal Communications Commission on Monday. A recent Amnesty International report estimates the Chinese regime's Xinjiang policies may have separated thousands of Uyghur families. Separately, in February, British officials revoked CGTN's broadcasting license in the UK. One of the reasons was that British regulators saw the Chinese Communist Party ultimately control CGTN, and that went against the law. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching, and see you tomorrow.